I arrived in Georgia, in Gori on August 11th, 2 days after the first bombing of residential buildings near the military base. And I went into the buildings and I saw some people were coming back to sweep the floors and pick up some of the belongings and some to clean up their houses. They were coming back on August 11th, but a day later they had to flee again because the Russian troops were coming into Gori, coming back. When I was in these apartments, what was very weird that some of the things in the debris survived, like a glass, a glass bottle would stand, or some flowers. Some little details would survive, and everything else would get burned down and ruined in Gori. I visited a hospital in Tbilisi to see the wounded soldiers in the reanimation ward, and they were well looked after, and they were in quite a difficult condition, and people were coming in still after the second bombing of Gori. On August 13th, the Russian troops came into Gori, and we were waiting. All of the journalists were waiting at the entrance to the city, waiting to see what happens. And when the Russian tanks first came in, there was big panic. The Georgian drivers started taking their cars and rushing off towards Tbilisi because people didn't know how to behave. It was the first time we saw Russian tanks face to face, and we didn't know how to react. But the Russian military, they waved their hands and they looked friendly, and they were quiet and calm. So people started getting more brave, and we basically followed the convoy and photographed the tanks as they went into Gori and then on their way to Tskhinvali. At that time, basically the entire population of Gori left overnight. Refugees were flushing in. They were coming in cars. They were basically the whole road was refugee traffic coming from Gori into Tbilisi, and then being distributed to various refugee camps. I visited one of them in Tskhinvali, where supposedly around 500 refugees were settled and their families in the tent camp temporarily. And I met a family there of Nastasia Vanishvili, and she was 11 years old, and she had 3 sisters, and her father owned a jewelry shop in Gori, and they had to flee their city, not knowing when they can go back. The refugee flow continued from Tskhinvali as we were again by the entrance to Gori city on August 15th. We saw an elderly refugee family of 4 people that had to walk 30 kilometers for 3 days through the forest, and they were coming from Kurta village behind Tskhinvali. They were exhausted, and one woman was basically lying down on the ground from exhaustion, and they sat down to eat, and they finally reached a point where it was safe. I also decided to visit some of the old refugee camps where refugees that had been living there for 17 years received a new flow of refugees from Tskhinvali. There were refugees from Abkhazia, such as Alla Tarasova, who's 68 years old. She's an ethnic Russian, and she fled Abkhazia 17 years ago after her husband and son were killed in the war, and ever since she's been living in this refugee camp in Tskhinvali, Chamia, which is up in the mountains, and the new flow of refugees arrived basically in the same camp. I managed to get on a Russian press tour, going to Tskhinvali. That was August 16th. Basically, it was allowed for the press with Russian accreditation, but I think some people managed to get through without even without the accreditation and visit. I went on that bus to Tskhinvali and then off to Vladikavkaz and back. The street of Telman, they showed us the basements where people were hiding during the bombing. Almost every other house was shelled or bombed. The residents are slowly going back there, and those who have whose houses survived are going back, and also those in the center of Tskhinvali, in the center of town, are slowly coming back, and there are works underway to rebuild some of the houses that were damaged. On the way back to Tskhinvali from the Russian tour from Vladikavkaz to Tskhinvali, we stopped to see Georgian prisoners of war. That was August 18th, and at 12 p.m. an exchange was supposed to happen of Georgian prisoners of war with the Russian prisoners of war, but it didn't happen because the negotiations were stalled apparently between the Georgian and Russian side. They didn't agree on some conditions. And finally, when I came back into Gori, I went to see Karaleti village, where reports have been of looting and burning and of local residents. They were scared, and some of them were hiding in the basement from the Ossetian irregulars. They claimed that the Ossetian irregulars were looting the houses. The Karaleti village was also bombed under bomb attack, and a few residential buildings were shelled. So we spoke to the villagers that for the first time on August 18th started coming out of the basement, but they were still very scared. This is Rena Effendi for EurasiaNet.